look at the core motivation for why your customer is engaging with you, why they're buying or repeat buying. Um, it's very rare, especially if you reach any scale, that all of your customers are the same. They're there for the same reason. Generally speaking, you'll find actually, if you go to that level of core motivation, you'll start to see it split and subdivide and say, you might have folks that buy on this cadence because they are there for this reason. Other folks have different budgets because of this reason. And so you'll start to want to personalize communications just at that level. So you might be taking your full audience and starting to break it down into some labels based on some of their history to say, here's the like VIPs. You might offer things that are specific to them. Here's some middle segment of folks that are like actively engaged. Maybe you have parents. It depends on your business, obviously, and I can't speak to that. But try to think about 3 to 5 personas that have different reasons for engaging with you, because then your messaging will be personalized to them, and you can do that qualitatively before you have the chance to do it with statistics.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. I wear a bunch of other hats as well, including running an agency, running a nonprofit in the cause marketing category, and having a brand of my own. And then there's an incubator, which I won't even go into. So the good thing about that is the commonality of the importance of best practices in marketing. So super excited to have David Joosten on, who's founded GrowthLoop. So let's go ahead and start with the founder story. So what was the catalyst in you looking at the ecosystem and deciding that what was already out there was not solving the problems that you felt needed to be solved?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, obviously very happy to be here. If you go back, I did start my career as a marketer at Google, a very data-driven company in general. And so did my co-founder. And a few years after we had left, we had assumed some of the like nitty-gritty problems that we had faced, which was the divide between data science and data teams and the actual marketing operations had been solved. We figured that was just a moment in time. And we discovered by starting to consult with a variety of like pretty advanced data science for marketing teams that not only had that problem not been solved, it had become worse in the sense that the surface area of it, the amount of data science for marketing that people were starting to do, and yet how challenging it was to actually use that data science and the insights, the targeting, the models in marketing was only getting to be larger of a problem. And so in the mid 2010s, let me kind of paint the picture. That's where we're at. You have at the same time AWS, Redshift, and Snowflake starting to like get off of the ground, but it's very early days. And you have some data science for marketing teams that sort of the elite companies that are thinking about marketing in a new and different way that's much more hyper targeted and personalized. And on the other side, you have sort of like the rest of the world, which is using much more one size fits all seasonal campaigns. Email marketing is very much siloed at the time from other channels. It's sort of driven by its own experts and its own tool set that's decoupled or completely separate from all this data science work. And I would say stepping into consulting with these early companies, it felt like, if you've seen the movie Moneyball back in the day, where it's folks that are doing very scrappy things, but they're data informed. And the impact that these early interventions are having is huge. And it's things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be as effective as they are. And being in that environment, my co-founder and I realized someone has to build the bridge between these functions, these teams. And so we built the first visual interface for marketers to use that would link directly with the data that was in the cloud data warehouse, where all the data science teams, analytics teams, and so on were working. And so they could self-serve. They could select the criteria, the models, the predictions that best suited their campaign, and then activate directly to all of their email platforms, paid media platforms, their CRMs, and other customer success or customer support platforms, even product and sort of owned and operated areas. And so that started to build this flywheel effect where you had data science and models producing these things that were experiments. And then because you could feed all that data back into the data warehouse where the analytics team would work, the measurement was closed loop. And you could actually determine statistically for the first time what really was working at the scale that you wanted it to be.
Yeah, that's a great story. When I think about the challenges that did it clients and prospects that I've heard, a lot of it really relates to before they even get to where you're talking about, where all the data is in the data warehouse.
Yeah.
It's the plumbing, right? Getting
Oh, yeah.
the data into the data warehouse. Some of it's available via API. Most of it these days is available via API. So at least in theory, right, you can get all the data into there. But you end up with sort of a mishmash of cookie windows and a mishmash of identifiers that layer on top of that. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about that plumbing and where you fit into that ecosystem from the perspective of maybe simplifying some of that, because that's an area that I've heard as a pain point for a lot of folks.
It is, and actually it was more so in the early days. I would say that very early on, we were only working with clients that had solved that problem by having an excellent data engineering function. So I used to joke that we were kind of building in the future or living in the future by working on the activation side. And then as we started to expand our, go to market to other companies and share our product more broadly, we realized that actually a lot of companies, the vast majority of companies, had not solved this problem. And we did a couple things. One, Fivetran and a few other data pipelining tools and platforms were sort of coming online in a big way, which meant that using sort of an interface, drag and drop, you could start to get access to a variety of data sources, and they would all just be dumped raw into the cloud data warehouse. So you sort of solve the data capture problem to a degree. And then the second big step was, how do you harmonize that data? How do you bring it together to resolve, the email addresses used for the email channel? You might have device ID or some other form of ID that's used for other channels. In some cases, you just have like name and address or something, right? For like a direct mail campaign. And resolving those is a technology question, but it's also a political question. The technology question by today has largely been solved depending on what you're willing to trade off. Like it's really important to get sort of pseudo-anonymous traffic on your website to be identified alongside the first party data you start collecting, then you might want a more traditional CDP that helps capture that all together. If you're much more focused about, hey, I really don't want any false positive matches, I don't want to assume the wrong thing and then mistarget someone, then I need to have a rules-based model inside my cloud data warehouse that step-by-step has error checking and resolution inside. And that's sort of the technology side. It's become much easier to create those data pipelines and plumbing. Our team basically built the tools a few years later for people to do it on a drag and drop basis in the cloud data warehouse to harmonize that. Then there's the political question, which is there are times where different teams, sales and marketing classically, but even within marketing, have different attribution or credit models for who gets credit for a sign up or a customer coming back or an upsell or a cross sell. And in those cases, you might have teams that are actually fighting one another on what a source of truth should look like. Because one says, hey, it's a household. The other one says, no, it's each individual user for this reason or that reason. Or one says, after a certain period of time, they're a new customer again because they've churned. Other teams might not have the same definition. And so those assumptions start to play out in different ways. Accounts and contacts for the sales team versus individual contacts for the marketing team. And that question is still the hard one, I find, especially when you go to enterprise or large companies like the ones that we work with. And the best advice I have for it is you have to have a single source of truth, which is even if you have different assumptions on the way out. On the way in, at some level, you're going to say, what is a customer? That has to be true for the enterprise, for the whole business. And then what is a marketable lead or a contact or whatever it is, that all can come off of that source of truth, and be a view that that specific team has. But don't lose sight of the fact that everyone has to be operating off of a single source of truth, or you can have chaos. You really do have a lot of chaos. And most companies just accept that. That's part of doing business. I have some great stories to share on that front at some point. But it doesn't need to be that way.
So, it sounds like education about best practices, regardless of what technology stack you use or what tools you use, is a big part of what everybody should be
Yeah.
doing, right? And for you, that meant you wanted to write a book, right? So you chose, how much should you include in the book? And, which areas did you feel like required the most education to empower the readers of the book to make the best decisions?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Well, when I shared the scope of the book, when it was in its first early stages with a colleague at Snowflake, David Wells, he says, that sounds like a 1,200 page tome. Are you kidding me? We managed to do it in less than 300 pages. It's like 200 and something pages. And the way we did it is we stripped out a lot of the, like, I'll call it the academic theory behind a lot of these things. And we got down to, like, what are the practical steps that you need to know in order to make good decisions about the type of technologies that you might invest in, the approaches to data, and basically some of the trade-offs and issues around privacy management and consent, and basically make it just a how-to referenceable guide for anyone that's trying to make it in the space as a marketing operations leader, marketing technology, or analytics leader. And what we found is my co-authors and I searched pretty broadly for, does a resource like this that goes soup to nuts on what you need to know exist out there in an unbiased or non-vendor aligned format? And the answer was no. You could find white papers and webinars and things like that from any number of vendors that were happy to tell you of their perspective on it. But it was really hard to kind of look across those categories and think about, what situations does it make sense to adopt a monolithic platform versus a composable one? When does it make sense actually to go all in on, say, an Adobe or Salesforce suite versus trying to, like, go a la carte? All of these key decisions, which have, like, massive consequences for years in terms of running operations of marketing in your company. Those kinds of questions were not answered very well out there. So we said, look, like, if you see the gap and you believe in it enough, you should go write it yourself. So we gathered actually 3 of us co-authors. My 2 co-authors were actually consultants in the space that worked across vendors. And then some of my expertise in first-party data to bring that book to life.
Great. Well, where would people find it?
It's on Amazon. First-party data activation is the title. Pretty self-descriptive, hopefully, for folks to find it with SEO. I think it's also available through Manning as the publisher on their website. It's an ebook format, regular print edition. They also have audiobook. So hopefully whatever format suits your audience, they can find it.
For sure. So you mentioned, 2 very related acronyms in your description of the book, which is the composable CDP versus a traditional CDP. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a lot of folks who understand the nuance between those. So I'd love you to define those for us now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, CDP is an acronym itself, so let's talk
Yes,
about
of
that
course.
quickly. Customer data platform. It was really meant to address a core problem, which was in a modern marketing technology stack, you have a lot of fragmentation. So you have an email platform, you have your paid media team, you might have a CRM, you might have customer success or support systems that are separate from a sales CRM. And you want to find a way to centralize your understanding of a customer and hopefully operate on that across those channels. So the original intent or purpose of a CDP or customer data platform, in my mind, was to solve a single view of the customer that you could use in your marketing. The original version of that was a monolithic or traditional CDP. which I'll say traditional just for the purpose of this conversation, which said, hey, look, we're going to host all that data. So, plug me into your mobile app, your website, even within your product and other areas. I'll help you collect the data. I'll try to make an easy tool set for harmonizing or bringing that data together so you have a single golden record of each customer. And then I'll help you use it for your email marketing and other systems you might use. That was the traditional version of that. What we found when we were working with very data-driven companies is that didn't work well, that model, that monolithic or traditional model. And so we started a composable version of that. Composable meaning that actually the data layer does not get put inside the CDP. It lives within the data warehouse in the cloud. And all of the sort of CDP capabilities, like the ability to build audiences based on these customer traits, to send those audience, run experiments, to do identity resolution, all of those things, measurement, would happen on the thin layer or application that would operate on that cloud data warehouse and single source of truth. That model worked really well for companies that did not want to constrain themselves to sort of the predetermined box of a traditional CDP, which made you take certain assumptions about the form of your customer data. The real world's messy, so it can maybe not fit the box sometimes. It also worked for companies that just had massive amounts of data. CDPs that were traditional weren't really built to host tons and tons of data. And so oftentimes their pricing models and other things would make it very difficult to keep scaling the amount of data fields per customer or just the sheer number of customer records you'd put inside that CDP. And then there were regulatory reasons. So when we talked to financial services firms, healthcare firms, and others, they wanted ownership over their own data. They did not feel comfortable hosting sensitive customer data and first-party data inside other people's systems. So they wanted to have it on their cloud instance, their cloud accounts, and just send the data that was like the audience itself, but not all of the data that was used to build that audience. And so for those reasons, this whole new architecture emerged, which was called the composable CDP, which acted upon the customer's tenant of the cloud data warehouse. So like just directly where they were hosting their own data in the cloud, as opposed to taking custody of that data in a new system, and allowing the identity resolution to be sort of a step-by-step, transparent, rules-based process that you might do in SQL, for example, if you're an analytics or analyst team.
Right, right. Well, that's very helpful, and understanding the reasons why that was sort of created is very useful. A couple of times you talked about the single source of truth and the importance of that, but you also talked about data being messy. And I've always found those things to be somewhat in opposition to each other, right? Because there's data leakage. Even with paid media, there's data leakage. And then you have the even messier area of earned media, which bridges sort of into the paid media space with things like influencer marketing, which look and feel a little bit like earned media, but also are often paid or compensated in some way.
Yeah.
And so how do you reconcile this idea? Like, is the single source of truth a myth, or do you just get as close as you can? Is it aspirational to just get that single source of truth?
Yes, it is a journey, not a destination. That's absolutely true.
Right.
On the one hand, there are aspects that should be irrefutable for a company and clearly understood. I'll tell you a quick story on that one.
Okay.
I worked with a national bank that at one point had a president that said, ask the question, how many customers do we have? And the truth is they couldn't answer that question because it depended on who you asked and the view of the data and how they aggregated and made assumptions. And the president was very persistent and just said, I would like the project to go cross-function across the whole bank just to answer this question and produce the output table of my customers so we know how they're trending. And, a long project ensued, but they made it to the end. They figured out how many customers and what they looked like that they had. And for years after this president had left the bank, the source of truth of the customer table that was used across so many functions, especially marketing and sales, but a lot of operational functions too, was named last name of the president, ID. And so the mark that that single decision had on this bank over years was irrefutable. It was like the marketing and sales and the customer experience all of a sudden felt unified, because some leader had taken the step to say that they won't accept the status quo of hyper fragmentation, even in an environment like a bank where they have, the personal lines of credit and mortgages and savings and checking accounts and CDs and investment. It's a very complicated, and they have, businesses and households and individuals. It's very complicated. If they can get to an answer on that, I believe almost every business can. So that's one side where I think that where there's a will, there's a way, and it's really valuable to get there. On the other side, some of the things you raised are around what I'd consider like more mid and upper funnel marketing activity, where you might have just a few fragments of a consumer profile or a B2B, a business profile of someone that you hope would become a customer. So this is sort of like you get someone to sign up for the email marketing list off of an e-commerce website, but you don't know anything else about them, basically. Or maybe in some cases you're doing a direct mail campaign, and because that's governed with different rules than some of the consent management for email, you're able to get to a list that you buy from a third party. You're having to reconcile that with your customer set of data. I think what I've seen work well for people is you have to have essentially your core source of truth that's managed and governed, and then like a sandbox or an environment where the rules are a bit looser in terms of the data sets you can bring in. The data sets around like privacy should not be looser, but in terms of at least like you don't need to necessarily square the box and the round hole at this stage. But once they become customers, you certainly should. So it's a messy world. You have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, right?
For sure, yeah, and I would agree. Sort of once you've got customer PII, that's sort of the catalytic moment where it's irrefutable that they're a customer, right?
Yeah, exactly. You have a paid transaction. I mean, you'd be surprised the debates that I've seen rage on of what a customer is, and because some services have a freemium model or something where they have very engaged, say, users. But I've always said, like, it's just much easier to look at a world where, like, if there's an exchange of dollars or a transaction or something like that, that really is like a customer definition for most businesses outside of maybe advertising or publisher network.
Right, right. So, one of the things that the sort of roller coaster of removal of PII from the media ecosystem and then the third-party cookie, is it here? Is it gone? Is it partially gone? Safari,
Yeah.
Chrome, all these ecosystems is, the ecosystem at large has been trying to find this balance where how do we retain targeting, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
isn't just good for the marketer and isn't just good for the publisher, but even the consumer doesn't want to see irrelevant advertising, but
Right.
they want to find that balance where they retain privacy, but still get relevant messaging, right? So do you feel like
Yeah.
that has been largely solved at this point? So that the ecosystem has sort of found that balance?
There's a new equilibrium, I guess. Maybe it's not solved, but there's a new equilibrium reached, which is first party data is really driving a lot of the new targeting capabilities. So all of the major browsers have, in some way, shape, or form, restricted third party cookies and third party cookie tracking at this point. The first stuff kind of happened in like 2019, 2020 with Safari and Firefox were kind of like the leading ones in the privacy world. Chrome came later, and Internet Explorer was somewhere in the middle, I believe. And so, and the same thing on, your iPhone, like tracking, and, I think it was 2020 was the iPhone apocalypse for marketers needing to use device ID information and things. That's now a few years behind us.
Mm-hmm.
And so people have found ways to adapt. And the ways that they've done that is websites and mobile apps create a first party identity of each user that they aggregate what behavioral characteristics you have in their products, what transactional data, anything that's just about your like demographics or household and things. And they're creating a profile, and it's really meant to serve you better because at this point you're a customer of theirs, or perhaps you've at least have some exchange of value, which is like you signed up for an email list for offers, let's say. And so building up that allows a advertiser or brand to actually figure out, I'd like to reach these people with some effective match rate across this ad platform or that ad platform. And, generally even own some of my own communication channels with customers, right? And so there's been a combination of you could still do, a decent amount of targeting on the major ad platforms. You can feed them some of your first party data to match with, in compliant ways. That went from we'll just trust you that you're sending us first party data to now there's actually consent identifiers that some of these do require via API so that they have some confirmation that this person has consented to be targeted. And then finally just owning your own channels and going direct to your own consumers. So that's sort of been the spectrum. And then what's new is over the last 2 years, we've seen a huge rise in what was retail media. I would call it commerce media more generally, which is any web platform for retailers and other like sports media entertainment that has a lot of eyeballs is figuring out that there's an entire new line of business where they can serve their user base better by actually using their first party data for brands to come in and reach their audience. And the margin profile on that's much better for the retailer than their core business. And so we're seeing that whole industry go composable. We have public case studies for GrowthLoop out for Costco, Allegro in Europe, and others that are like creating this composable first commerce media network.
Yeah, that's a great point. You talked a lot about the larger enterprises, right? And
Yep.
the wonderful thing that they have is they have large data sets and the new data comes in on every channel or every ad buy that they do pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
So once you get into mid-market, once you get into, SMB, particularly the S part of SMB, obviously the
Yeah.
data sets get really sparse. So how should the smaller marketers think about first party data and think about data in general, right? They may not, they're typically below the price point where they could even consider a CDP of any kind,
Yes.
not, right? But yet
Yeah.
they do want to take advantage of the power that comes with first party data. So what are your recommendations, at the different sort of sweet spots of data size and empowering businesses to take advantage of first party data at different sizes?
Yeah. So enterprise we've talked a lot about, but briefly I'll just say that these are companies that want to build their core expertise with real teams of data scientists, marketing operations people, et cetera, to make it all come together in a like hyper personalized way. For we'll call it like medium sized companies, they actually I've seen start to invest in data infrastructure analytics a little bit. So this might be, a company that might have in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even small millions of customers. And for them, the value add is they don't have the resources to invest in a data science team and marketing operations. They really need to rely on automations, so systems that are pre-integrated in things. And they also need to now better leverage AI to actually come up with the experiments to run. So we're seeing that come into market. So GrowthLoop, for example, but other companies as well, have actually started to propose or suggest audiences with AI that are likely to perform the best. And then if you're on the small business side, number one, you want to get coverage and a regular cadence of communication and engagement with your customer base in general.
Yeah.
So, what that looks like is there are a variety of great, simple email marketing, text marketing, and other sort of one-to-one or one-to-many communication tools out there. A lot of them will help you actually do consent management built in, which means that they will capture the person signing up for the email list and their consent in the platform. And if they want to unsubscribe, they manage that all in the same platform. So you don't have to take on all of that administrative burden as the small business owner or manager. That's critical. And you got a million other jobs, obviously, at that scale. I get it. On the other side, in terms of like, where can you build and go from here compared to an enterprise? Enterprises have to look at things statistically. They might do a focus group here or there, but generally speaking, they're looking for very large patterns. And if you think about the challenge they have folks effectively sitting in a conference room or at their desk in some headquarters office, very removed many times from their customers. The great thing about small businesses is day in and day out, they're usually face to face with many of their customers or a quick call away from some of the biggest ones. And so you have this opportunity to get qualitative data and form a thesis around what kind of customer personas do you have? And that's a key question that I always ask small business owners, but honestly, businesses are marketers at all stages and scales, which is look at the core motivation for why your customer is engaging with you, why they're buying or repeat buying. It's very rare, especially if you reach any scale, that all of your customers are the same. They're there for the same reason. Generally speaking, you'll find actually, if you go to that level of core motivation, you'll start to see it split and subdivide and say, you might have folks that buy on this cadence because they are there for this reason. Other folks have different budgets because of this reason. And so you'll start to want to personalize communications just at that level. So you might be taking your full audience and starting to break it down into some labels based on some of their history to say, here's the like VIPs. You might offer things that are specific to them. Here's some middle segment of folks that are like actively engaged, maybe of parents. It depends on your business, obviously, and I can't speak to that. But try to think about 3 to 5 personas that have different reasons for engaging with you, because then your messaging will be personalized to them. And you can do that qualitatively before you have the chance to do it with statistics.
Yeah, for sure. And I think all the tools for hyper personalization, even some self-serve ones are now where they allow for that, where it might have been, prohibitive from a time perspective or a resources perspective in the past. So, final question is really, what else should marketers be thinking about as they go through this journey of accumulating more information about their customers, building first-party data sets, and then activating them effectively? So what else should they be thinking about that we didn't discuss?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the future of AI is really human augmentation with AI. And so you kind of have to lean on left and right brain in order to succeed in this. And that's what makes marketing so fun, at least for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of the folks in your audience. But essentially, if you bring together the analytical teams and data science, et cetera, you will discover things that are counterintuitive, that are really good insights that you can use for personalization. On the other side, nothing beats actually talking to some customers and understanding them. And yes, you extrapolate from a few data points, but you get a texture and you get a depth of understanding that you can't recreate elsewhere. And if you can bring that empathy building and that intuition into the data science that's happening in terms of what questions to explore, what things to test, I think that is the magic combination. And ultimately, the key is how quickly can you experiment? And I think that, like, if you look at the purpose of building these pipelines and automation and everything else, it's about driving experimental velocity. And ultimately, with GrowthLoop, we've gone down the path of calling it the compound growth engine, because we were trying to actually speak to this very question of, if you can improve, say, 1% a week instead of 1% a quarter or 1% a year, in terms of the effectiveness of what you're saying to customers, the relevance you have, et cetera, the actual exponential growth curve of your business is very different a few years out. And so small changes that you can do today have a profound impact. And it's about that tight cycle of trying ideas, measuring the ideas, trying new ideas, measuring those, and closing the loop on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had when internally I came up with calling something compound marketing. I used a slightly different way of thinking about it, but it had a similar compounding, right?
Yeah.
I thought about it from a touch point perspective, as in, anytime you improve any one of the touch points and you add a few basis points or percentage points to that touch point,
Yeah.
it gives you more leverage, right? Because
Yes.
your ability to buy media these days in an auction environment, whether it's auction-based search, social, programmatic, CTV, whatever it is, your ability to afford it has
Yeah.
to do with how well you've squeezed every bit of efficiency out of that compounding effect, right? Because
Absolutely.
each of those touch points getting a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, has huge benefits. So thanks so much, David, for joining us, and talking about the power of data, the power of first party data for marketing.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.